Here on Morning Live. There are various views regarding the growth of the entertainment and media content market in Africa. Optimists say it is exponential, with pay TV and subscription VOD service revenue estimated to reach $6 billion by 2021. But the other view says Africa's broadcast markets are facing tougher times, and even the larger players are feeling the strain. With online streaming of content becoming bigger and data prices putting a dampener on it, DISCOP's three-day event, it's a gathering, might help clarify some of this. It is where experts meet to discuss matters of African broadcast, telecoms, content and related industries, and this will all be under the spotlight. Lara, Preston, the marketing manager of DISCOP, is in studio with us to discuss this.
Good
to see you. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you so much.
So there is a broadcasting revolution happening, whether we like it or not. And let's begin by talking about what this actually covers. When we talk about DISCOP, the gathering of broadcast media in Africa, what are we dealing with?
Well, I think the very term broadcast is probably becoming problematic in the sense of what is TV. And I think that's also where you see the gap between the optimists and the pessimists. So, I mean, DISCOP is a content market more than anything. So it's bringing together producers of content and buyers of content. And these days, buyers of content are less and less traditional broadcasters and more your streaming platforms, video-on-demand platforms, OTT, which is over the top, all these streaming services that people are now engaging with. So the Netflix, the Showmax, the iFlix, all these different platforms. Yeah. So you're seeing a huge shift, and obviously that puts strain on broadcast TV advertising revenue, as we see here in South Africa, and that's happening across the continent. But at the same time, you're seeing this massive increase in other opportunities for producers of content to sell their content, especially African content now, because it's becoming borderless. You know, things like Netflix are borderless. Yeah. So you're seeing, on the one hand, constraints on the broadcast side, but on the other side, huge opportunities on the more digital streaming, all these other platforms.
It's quite phenomenal, actually, how the space has opened up and how it's been completely revolutionized. And I like the way you say broadcasting is one of those broad terms. Whether you can call it broadcasting or not, we don't know. But in terms of African markets, how are we faring?
Well, I think, you know, there's a big focus right now on what they call the MENA region, which is Middle East and North Africa, which is faring very, very well. Sub-Saharan Africa probably a bit slower, although the numbers are so much bigger. Yeah. So, you know, again, when we talk about exponential growth, one's coming off a low base. But if you look at the potential, obviously the numbers are massive compared to other markets. You are seeing constraints. I mean, Kwese just shut down their pay TV platform, but now they're focusing on their iFlix, which is streaming, and they're focusing on play. So also, content's also spread out now. It includes esports and games and all these other aspects as well. So I'd say overall Africa's faring well. I think there's other areas that still need to catch up, and that's some of the topics that are discussed at DISCOP as well, which is around intellectual property rights. Yeah. And all those things that go with it, because you still find some broadcasters across the continent who, whether it's playing music that they're not paying royalties for, or even sharing content that they don't necessarily have the licenses for. So these are some of the topics that get discussed at a market like this, where you also have the policies that need to catch up. So the intellectual property rights, and then obviously issues of data, et cetera, et cetera. So there are all these related issues. Yeah. And so when you have a gathering like this, you get policymakers, you get discussions around co-production and financing. So it's from the production side all the way through to the sales and distribution side.
You see, you've touched on a very sensitive issue for us here in South Africa, and I'm not necessarily bringing the rest of the continent into the discussion, but us, we struggle with data prices, we struggle with speed, we're struggling with all of that. So to actually go and have a competition between, you get like Asian markets and North American markets that is uncapped, fast, jet fast speed data that, you know, going and streaming is the only way to do it. But here, it's still a very, very big problem. I mean, I imagine this will be discussed.
Yeah, no, this is a huge problem. And the data costs, I mean, South Africa relative to the rest of the world, I mean, the studies show, I mean, we're paying ridiculous amounts for our data. I think that's going to change. I think the pressure is there on it to change. But what you're also seeing is, I mean, is the cell phone companies themselves getting in on the action. You've got Cell C Black, you've got MTN, which had Play and Shorts, and they're creating these offers now with datas and bundles. So you get this zero-rated data where, so with certain platforms, you get unlimited or discounted rates. So I think you're going to see more and more of that, where the telecoms are now, in some ways, the gatekeepers in the way that broadcasters used to be, in terms of the content that gets bundled and has the cheaper data is going to be the content that survives. So I think that's a very interesting space we're going to see, where the networks, the cell phone networks, are almost becoming the aggregators and the gatekeepers of content because they control the costs and the access to data a lot of times, especially in the mobile space.
I want to talk a little bit about pay TV now, because I think that there's an interesting shift and conversation to be had around that pay TV, and many people looking at this and saying, we don't want them anymore, and it's becoming under pressure because people are finding that it is cheaper and easier to stream what they like the likes of Netflix, as opposed to going and subscribing to DSTV, where you're constantly watching repeats. You have to see adverts, you can't see what you want to see, whereas the other way, it's much easier. So the question I need to ask is, from the trends we're seeing around the world, what's happening to pay TV?
Yeah, I mean, pay TV is under major pressure. As I said, Kwese have shut down their pay TV. Yeah. DSTV are seeing their numbers fall, not just in South Africa, but across the continent. I think also what you're seeing is the pay TV operators diversifying their model. So, for instance, MultiChoice, have launched Showmax. Now it's free with your subscription.
Yes, I see that.
Other broadcaster pay TV platforms as well also have streaming platforms, or whether they're catch-up models or different content. And I think the trend, as data costs come down, as high-speed internet is rolled out across the continent, I think we are going to see more and more pressure on pay TV as we go. And I mean, there's of course also then the shift from analog to digital. So it also puts the question of even free-to-air channels, who are reliant sometimes, or going to become more reliant on these bouquets of subscription bundles to get even the free-to-air channels out. So I think we're seeing a massive change, and I think everything is going to migrate into the digital space, whether it's via satellite or whether it's via mobile platforms or streaming platforms. But I think, as we say, traditional broadcast is shrinking.
I mean, look at a platform like this. We're sitting here at the SABC. We're sitting in a financial difficulty, and I mean, let's be open and honest about that. So, and the models are changing wherever you go. So, the traditional mechanism of broadcasting, the way we know it now, is it going to change?
Well, I think it is already changing.
Yeah?
I mean, if you look at this big, beautiful studio and all the people sitting here and the technology and everything that's required, you've got people that are putting together streamed TV shows in their homes, and maybe, yes, we could say, oh, the quality is not as good. But what's been proven again and again is people don't necessarily mind. If the content is engaging, they might not have all the fancy lights and all the fancy equipment, but you're finding, especially in terms of short content, which is where, especially in Africa, there's a huge growth because of the data issues. Short content is easier to view, it's cheaper to view, it's cheaper to make. So short, engaging content is really what's leading the way. And the costs of running a traditional TV channel are proving, I think, more and more difficult everywhere, not just for the SABC. Yeah. But I mean, the massive overheads that come with that, you just can't compete when you're competing with on-the-fly networks that are internet-only stations. You've got something like Scoop Networks that are out of Amsterdam and they're now based in Kenya. They send two people all over Africa to cover stories. Their overheads are much lower.
Yeah, and this is exactly what it
and
is.
That's where people are watching
filming on their cell phones, watching on your cell phones. I mean, when you look at the role of the competitions also between telecommunication companies, surely this comes into it. I know we spoke a little bit about that. I mean, we saw a deal struck between Telkom and Vodacom, allowing Telkom subscribers who have very reasonable data prices to roam on Vodacom. So that's also something that I imagine we'll start seeing happening more and more on the continent and spreading out.
Well, what I mean, Vodacom's now expanded quite heavily into East Africa with stakes in Safaricom. So you're also finding, MTN's expanded more into West Africa. But so you're finding, cell phone companies that are sort of claiming territories. And I think also those roaming costs are going to come down. So you'll see like I say, it's going to become much borderless and seamless as time goes on.
And that's hence where this all comes into it, DISCOP, all of these things and much more being discussed.
Yeah.
Who's being represented there, by the way?
So there's about 2,000 delegates that attend.
Wow.
And there's a huge contingent of those are independent producers. So those are content producers. And that's really what DISCOP is about. It's about bringing Africa's content producers together with buyers. So you get huge players. So you get the SABC is there. There's a stand being built right now. You get major players, Azam Media, who are a major pay TV aggregator from East Africa. Then you also get international buyers. I mean, BBC has Swahili platforms. The French have Swahili platforms. Swahili obviously being a big focus of these days in content. But, you know, you'll also get Fox, the Africa Channel, which is a North American company that only broadcasts to the diaspora, but all their content is African. Yeah. So you're getting this real demand for African content for the rest of the continent and for the diaspora. So you've got Fox Networks, Sony Pictures, MGM, Turkish companies. China have a huge presence this year as well. So the demand for African content is growing, and that's where the opportunities are. And that's what DISCOP is about. So it's bringing together the producers. So if I produce documentaries about women, I can find a buyer who's interested in documentaries about women. And that's fantastic. The idea.
That's so great. Well, good luck with it. I hope it goes very, very well. In studio with us was DISCOP marketing manager Lara Preston, giving us views on the direction that not only Africa, but the world's broadcast content is taking. And this is all going to be discussed at DISCOP, which is starting tomorrow. It starts tomorrow. All right, let's take a break. We'll see you after this. Stay tuned.